Prior to the 1960s, the Christian consensus in America enabled us to have a strong, prosperous, and safe country. After the 1960s, things began to unravel. But the seeds for the destruction of the Christian consensus in America go way back to the 19th century. Today, we're going to examine three men who helped to end the Christian consensus in America. While many young people have been duped into thinking these three men are heroes, they are in reality among the worst villains in history. The extent to which they turned America away from the truth cannot be overstated. Who were these three men and what did they do? Stay tuned because you're going to learn some things in this video that will shock you. In part one of our series on America's Christian foundations, we learned about how different America was just 60 years ago. We gave evidence of the cultural decay in America that has occurred since Americans rejected the Christian consensus embraced by our founding fathers. We gave undeniable proof that our founding fathers were Christians who based America on Christian principles. Those principles kept America strong, united, and prosperous until the cultural shift of the 1960s. In part two, we looked at the biblical influence of the English common law on early America, as well as the founders' view that the Bible should be taught in public schools. In part three, we discovered the origins of the phrase separation of church and state and took a look at what the founding fathers said about church and state issues. Now, if you haven't seen parts 1, 2, and 3, I highly encourage you to go back and watch those videos. In our video today, we'll learn about three men who had a very negative impact upon America. Their influence led to a takeover of the Supreme Court by men who twisted the meaning of the separation of church and state phrase to help destroy the Christian consensus in America. We'll examine the Supreme Court's participation in the dismantling of the Christian consensus in part 5 of our series. Regarding the men we'll examine briefly in this video, you need to understand that what they did was by design. They knew what they were doing and they wanted to do it. In the mid-19th century, a philosophy called humanism began to become popular among educational elites in Europe and America. At the heart of this philosophy was the belief that man was the highest being. There is no God. This was a secular or non-religious view of the world. Throughout the 19th century, several proponents of humanist thought emerged, with three in particular having a very big impact on American culture. As you study these men, you will learn that they in turn were greatly influenced by many others who came before them. And there were many others in the 19th century besides these three, but these three were instrumental in changing America from a nation that embraced the Christian consensus to the one we have today, where the Bible is rejected and God's laws are mocked and ridiculed. In essence, these three men, and all humanists, have some common goals. Number one, they wanted to destroy the Christian consensus and replace it with a humanist worldview. Number two, they wanted to destroy the traditional family and replace it with the collective, or the state. Perhaps you remember a book written by Hillary Clinton called It Takes a Village. Third, they wanted to replace private ownership of property with state ownership of property. And number four, they wanted to replace absolute truth with relative truth. Instead of A is A based on a non-changing truth from a Christian perspective, man decides what is considered truth. It is therefore subject to change and often does. Now let's look at the first of these three men. Karl Marx, who lived from 1818 to 1883, was a German philosopher, economist, historian, political theorist, sociologist, journalist, and revolutionary socialist. Marx provided the philosophical framework for the move away from the Christian consensus. His philosophy became known as Marxism. Marx and his partner in crime, Friedrich Engels, published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. It introduced their concept of communism and the best ways to implement it. Marxism is collectivist in nature. With collectivism, individuals have no rights, only the collective or the state matters. Marxism is expressed in two main political economic systems, socialism and communism. With socialism, there is some private ownership of the means of production allowed, but with full state control. Private property is limited with state control over education, healthcare, industry, and so forth. People are taxed to the extent that eventually most of what they earn goes to the state to redistribute the wealth and support social programs. This redistribution of wealth from those who have earned to those who have not worked at all is a hallmark of Marxism. Socialism is usually introduced into a country by an elite group of people who convince the masses that free enterprise is evil and that giving up individual liberty for the good of the collective or the state is a good thing. In other words, via democracy, people vote to become socialist by degrees, little by little. Many European countries today embrace socialism, and many in America are trying to get our nation to do the same. Socialism is a stepping stone towards full-blown communism, and according to the Communist Manifesto, it will eventually lead to communism. Communism is similar to socialism, but usually introduced by force, like the Soviet Union, Communist China, North Korea, Cuba, etc. With communism, there is full state control and ownership over everything and everyone. Political opponents are killed or sent to labor camps to work for the state. There is no personal liberty. It is important to note that both socialism and communism are Marxist in nature, and the one leads to the other. Nazi Germany was actually a socialist state under the control of a fascist dictator, Adolf Hitler. Nazi is an abbreviation of the German pronunciation of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which is the English translation of their full name. Those on the left end of the political spectrum in America claim that, even though the Nazis themselves claimed to be socialist, they really were not. No, of course not. Those on the left today try to identify Nazis with the political right in America. Thus, the reason the socialist group Antifa, which is short for anti-fascists, calls Donald Trump supporters Nazis. Although it is the Antifa activists themselves who use Nazi-like tactics to silence their opposition, including destruction of property and physical assault. Just a little case of projectionism going on there. Regarding the Nazis, using relative truth, they redefined person to exclude Jews, which made murdering 6 million of them in concentration camps perfectly legal. Mass murder is a common practice among Marxists. In communist countries during the 20th century, between 140 and 200 million people were murdered by their own governments for opposing Marxism. But hey, you can trust American socialists. Ayn Rand, 20th century objectivist philosopher, herself an atheist, stated, "There is no difference between communism and socialism except in the means of achieving the same ultimate end. Communism proposes to enslave men by force, socialism by vote. It is merely the difference between murder and suicide." So that gives you an idea of Marx and his legacy. Marxism gave humanism a political and economic framework that excluded and opposed the Christian beliefs that had guided America from its foundation. Those beliefs embraced by our founding fathers, including the belief that our right to life, liberty, and property come from God, not government. The second man we will learn about is Charles Darwin. He lived from 1809 to 1882. He was an English naturalist, geologist, and biologist, best known for his contributions to the so-called science of evolution. Of course, in college, he studied theology, not science, but shh, don't tell the kids in public schools. Darwin's most famous work, published in 1859, was called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. You will notice that the second half of the title, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, is inherently racist and has thus been removed from the editions peddled to students in public schools and colleges. The secular humanists controlling the public school system in America want students to embrace Darwinism, but they don't want students to know how racist evolution is and has been from the start. In fact, Darwin's work was used from the mid-19th century onward to promote the lie that black people are inferior to white people. So not only did Darwin's book promote evolution as the explanation for how the world and man came into existence, eliminating God from the equation, it was also used to justify the continuation of slavery in the 19th century despite the rapidly growing abolition movement in America. Since humanism requires a worldview without God, Darwin's book provided humanists with a seemingly scientific alternative to the Genesis account of creation in the Bible. In essence, Darwin's model replaced God with time and chance. All of existence was the result of natural forces acting apart from intelligent design. Thus, the equation for evolution could be stated like this: nothing plus time plus chance equals everything. And they condemn Christians for having faith. So the universe is here by chance, the earth is here by chance, and man is here by chance. No God necessary. This had profound impacts upon the world. It soon became popular for elites in education, science, and government to embrace Darwin's model and reject the creation account in the book of Genesis in the Bible. People who held to the biblical account were deemed superstitious or foolish, and it became popular to embrace Darwin's humanist perspective on origins. Over time, the Bible and God's laws became unpopular altogether. This opened the door to man pushing moral relativism and an anything-goes form of morality that took off like a rocket ship in the 1960s. There's no God? Let's party! The Bible actually predicted this shift in man's thinking in Romans 1:19 through 25. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shewed it unto them. In other words, creation itself is proof there is a creator. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, into birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So man in his arrogance denies God, then worships the created things instead of God. In ancient times, man worshipped idols of wood and stone or animals. Modern man sets himself up as God. This is at the heart of humanism. Again, God's word warns us in 1 Timothy 6:20 through 21. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen. The Bible told us over 2,000 years ago that some would use science as an excuse to err from the truth. Getting back to Darwin, some of the effects of societies embracing his views of evolution include: number one, relative truth has replaced absolute truth. In other words, man, not God, decides what is true or not, and consequently, what is considered right or wrong. Second, loss of respect for human life. Man is just a higher form of animal, not someone important made in the image of God, so man has no great value. Number three, loss of respect for individual rights. With no morality to guide him, man needs a more powerful state to determine right and wrong and control his actions. In other words, the less Christian a society becomes, the more wicked the people become. This leads to the need for more laws with greater restrictions upon individual liberty. Number four, animal rights activism. The lower animals should have the same rights as man, the higher animal. You can kill an unborn baby and be applauded by half the country. If you kill an eagle's egg, you'll end up in jail. You egg murderer, off with your head. Number five, man's reason, via psychology, replaced the Bible in deciding right and wrong and how to deal with crime. This has contributed greatly to the increase in crime, since rather than punishing crime in accordance with the law of reaping and sowing as taught in the Bible, which deters crime, by the way, man instead tries to promote his reasoning in dealing with crime with historically tragic results. Number six, each world society or culture is of equal value. No one culture is better or worse than any other. This, of course, is an example of relative truth. Thus, the headhunters in South America are not evil for killing and eating people. That's just their culture. Put a moral relativist on the menu and see what they think of that. While Marx's work preceded Darwin's work, Marx embraced Darwin's work as the basis for his theories. Regarding Darwin's book on the origins, Marx wrote to Frederick Engels on December 19, 1860, "This is the book which contains the basis in natural history for our view." Darwin's model of evolution helped to eliminate God from the equation, which further strengthened humanist and Marxist ideology. Now on to our third important person. John Dewey, who lived from 1859 to 1852, was an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer whose ideas have been influential in education and social reform. Karl Marx provided humanists with a political and economic system, and Charles Darwin provided humanists with a seemingly scientific foundation for humanism and Marxism. What was needed was a way to get Americans to reject the Christian consensus and embrace the humanist model. John Dewey was the man with the plan. John Dewey is known as the father of modern education. Quoting author Bruce Dietrich Price, John Dewey was a social engineer, one might even say a community organizer. He believed that socialism is the future. His self-appointed mission was to implement the transition to this brave new world. All of his grand theories, his scores of books, his hundreds of articles can be summed up as a program for making America socialist. Now, 30 years ago, I attended Johnson State College in Johnson, Vermont. It's a teacher's college out there where I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in history and a minor in education with my Vermont State teaching credential for social studies grades 7 through 12. Of course, I was forced to take a half dozen or so education classes. I can assure you that the college absolutely loved John Dewey and his progressive education. Getting back to Dewey, men who held to socialist beliefs gained influence in colleges and universities and began to promote these ideas and teach against the Christian consensus. They took the position that these new philosophies were backed by science and the Christian consensus was nothing more than a result of religious superstition. Progressives knew that the way to get future generations of Americans to buy into humanism and socialism was to get control of the schools so humanists and socialist beliefs could be taught in place of the Christian values that had been in schools for hundreds of years. John Dewey and other progressive leaders like George Counts condemned American capitalism for its greed and individualism and praised the Soviet Union's communism. Counts once stated, "Jettison capitalism, support the creation of a socialized economy, and overcome their groundless fears of indoctrination." Many progressives in the 1920s actually visited the Soviet Union. They brought back glowing reports. Dewey admired, quote, "the marvelous development of progressive educational ideas and practices under the fostering care of the Bolshevik government." According to information gathered after the fall of the Soviet Union from the former Soviet Comintern, which promoted communism around the world, we now know that the Soviet Union literally set up entire villages, fake villages and factories for these progressives from other countries to visit. While starvation and oppression was the norm in the USSR, these dupes were given tours that were orchestrated to deceive them into thinking that communism was working great. When the Soviet Union murdered all the progressive educators, men like Dewey and Counts stopped advocating for all-out communism and started promoting socialism instead. Oops. John Dewey was one of the signers of the 1933 Humanist Manifesto. Here is one of the manifesto's points, 14th point. The humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. The goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Humanists demand a shared life and a shared world. In other words, humanism is another way to promote communism. So, what if you do not want to share what you have earned through hard work with those who have done absolutely nothing? The government will take your wealth by force. You don't say. Dewey was a humanist who promoted socialism and wanted to transform America into a socialist society using the education system to indoctrinate students. Over time, the progressive professors and teachers influenced those in education, law, politics, and economics. They literally rewrote the history books so that history was taught from a Marxist humanist perspective. You want proof? When you were taught in public school what the number one reason was for America declaring their independence from Great Britain, what was it? Taxation without representation. Ha ha ha! You win the prize for being a Marxist dupe. Guess where that is on the list of 27 grievances mentioned in the Declaration of Independence? If you guessed number 17, you'd be right. But the Marxists can't help themselves. They want everything to be about economic oppression. With progressives in charge of education, tremendous changes began to take place in America as more and more people rejected the Christian consensus. By the 1960s, humanists had gained control of many of our nation's institutions, including the Supreme Court of the United States. As early as 1947, the Supreme Court was interpreting laws based not on the original intent of the Constitution, as was their responsibility, but rather on what they perceived to be for the good of society based on their own progressive views. In part 5 of our series on America's Christian foundations, we'll examine how the Supreme Court helped to transform America from a Christian nation to a secular humanist nation. You won't want to miss it. Let's quickly recap what we've covered in this very important video. While there were many people who helped turn America away from embracing a Christian worldview, there were 3 men in particular who had a tremendous impact on American society. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, promoting the egalitarian ideology of communism. It has been used by progressives as the blueprint to replace the free enterprise system in America with socialism. Charles Darwin's work created a seemingly scientific reason to reject the biblical account of creation in the book of Genesis. Evolution gave humanists an explanation for origins without the need for God. This opened the door for relativism and moral relativism, which took off in the 1960s. John Dewey used education to change America from a nation of individualism and free markets to a collectivist society embracing socialism. These three men helped change America into a nation without a Christian moral base. This has made it much easier for people to enjoy the pleasures of sin without being judged for it. Of course, we reap what we sow, and we have a much more divided, violent, and unstable society as a result. As we conclude this presentation, be certain to look for Part 5 in this series on America's Christian foundations. We'll examine how the Supreme Court helped transform America into the secular humanist mess our nation is today. You won't want to miss it. Until then, I've listed some resources in the video description below for documentation and to assist you with further study. Remember, the information presented here at the Dan Perspective channel is very important. Please help us to get the truth out to our fellow Americans. Please like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and share the video with others. Feel free to leave a comment. Words of encouragement are always appreciated, as well as helpful input on how we can improve our content. Finally, if you're not 100% certain you're going to heaven someday, check out that video linked to below as soon as possible. Until next time, thank you for watching, and remember Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Thank you, and goodbye.